Mississippi Levee Board. I'm a commissioner from Washington County.
And I'm Peter Nimrod. I'm Chief Engineer for the Mississippi Levee Board. The Levee Board hired me in 1999. I became the Chief Engineer in 2004. We got great commissioners like Hank Burdine. We've got 7 elected commissioners that represent our counties that protect the Mississippi Delta. They are fabulous, civic-minded guys, give up their time for flood control. They obviously don't get paid. They do it because of the Delta. They do it to protect the Delta. And that's the job at the Mississippi Levee Board is to protect the Delta from Mississippi River floods. So the Mississippi Levee Board was established in 1865, right after the Civil War. So during the Civil War, there were some levees that were here, makeshift levees, nothing really organized at all. The Civil War broke out. Union troops blew up levees for strategic military moves. And once the war was over with, the first thing the Mississippi legislature said was, hey, we got to get this levee system back together to protect the Mississippi Delta. So in 1865, first act of the Constitution, in 1865, they actually established this Board of Mississippi Levee Commissioners to rebuild the levee system and to be in charge of it. So we've been here for 155 years now, and we've had a long history of tragedies at the beginning, not very successful. We kept building the levee higher and higher, trying to beat Arkansas, trying to beat Louisiana. We would be successful one year, the next year we would not. So early on, it was a trial by fire and build your levee better, bigger and better. And then the big one came along in 1927, 93 years ago, and it proved everyone's levee was weak. So it wasn't just a failure here in Mississippi, it was a failure in Louisiana and Arkansas, Tennessee, all up and down the line from Cairo, Illinois down to the Gulf of Mexico.
At that time, there was no coordination between the levee districts, though, was it?
Not whatsoever. We were just trying to beat you. We were trying to beat Arkansas. They're trying to beat us. We're trying to beat Louisiana. If their levee fails, that's great for us. It protects us. So there was this whole, mentality of we're going to be better than you. And that's why during the 27 flood, everyone was very nervous about people from Arkansas coming over and blowing up our levee so they could save themselves. So there was a lot of armed guards on the levee during the 27 flood just because of that purpose. So after the 27 flood, the United States Congress realized that, oh my gosh, 41% of the continental United States uses the Mississippi River to drain its water. And so we're basically liable for these people down here in the south, in the lower Mississippi River. And so they came up with a Flood Control Act in 1928, and it set up a big project called the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project. And not only did that project raise our levees 10 feet on average and made everybody's levees uniform, we're the exact same as Arkansas, the exact same as Louisiana. Nobody has a fair advantage or anything like that. Everything's exactly the same. And it's built to a project design standard, which means the worst case scenario ever coming down the Mississippi River, this levee system is designed to protect us against that. So there is no option for failure here. This levee is built to never fail. Okay.
It took the 1927 flood for Congress to realize and for other states to realize that it is a national problem. It's not just a regional problem, like Peter said. That 41% of the continental United States, from the Allegheny Mountains all the way out to Rocky Mountains in Colorado, come right through our doorstep right here.
And the MRT project was not only raising the levee 10 feet on average, but it also included, floodways. It included backwater areas, included all these different things, these river improvements, these basin improvements, all these things that you got to think about. You can't just build a levee. You got to have areas for the water to escape during serious high water events. So you have backwater areas, you have levee systems, you have pumping plants, and you have these drainage structures. All these things come into play when you have a big Mississippi River flood, just so we can make it through.
And really, to a degree, with our backwater areas and our different floodways, they realized that during time of extreme flood, to be able to allow the river to go where it historically wants to go. Not to just be able to say we're going to build a bigger levee and we're going to control it and this is the way it's going to, because that didn't work. That was proved in 1927. But to open up these floodways at certain stages, to open up a floodway to protect Cairo, Illinois, open up one to protect Baton Rouge, New Orleans, different areas like this, our backwater flood area, South Delta flood area. to be able to allow the river to go where it historically has wanted to go, relieve pressure on the levees only. So it's a conglomeration of all, like you're saying, of all different types of projects in this thing.
And we lived the test in 2011. And 2011 was really a record flood. That 2011 flood passed 26% more water than the 1927 flood. And you know the disaster we had in 1927, and to have a flood event that was way more than that and completely successful. Not one acre was flooded that wasn't designed to be flooded. Not one person lost his life. It was a tremendous success. So that 2011 flood really validated all the work that had been done since 1927 to improve our levee system all the way from Cairo, Illinois to the Gulf of Mexico. So we were real proud of that. Hank had just gotten on the board, was instrumental in that whole flood event. All of our commissioners were engaged. The levee board was engaged. We worked 7 days a week. We worked 24 hours a day, putting in temporary measures in place so we could pass that event. It wasn't easy, but we got through it successfully. And after that flood was over with, the Corps of Engineers came in. We decided as a board, we're not going to hide anything. We're going to show you all our dirty underwear. We're going to show you all our problems, okay? Because we want them fixed. So we showed the Corps of Engineers all of our problems. We had 11 problem areas that we had to do something temporarily, put something in place temporarily during that flood event to pass it. And when it was over with, we said, hey, Corps of Engineers, here's 11 spots. We need help. Okay, we can't live through this one again. We can't fight this flood again. Things only get worse with time. So the Corps came in. The Congress appropriated $802 million in 2011 to fix the problem areas from Cairo, Illinois to Gulf of Mexico. We ended up with about $12 million spent in Mississippi fixing those 11 problem areas for us. Took about 4 years to get it done. From 2011 through about 2015, we got all 11 problem areas fixed with landside seepage berms or a combination of relief wells and landside seepage berms. So all those areas are fixed. And so the perfect timing, 2015, that all got done right in time for 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20 Mississippi River serious floods in a row, 5 in a row, that we've had to deal with. And we've had absolutely no problems at those problem areas because they were fixed permanently. So it is a great partnership between the Mississippi Levee Board and the Corps of Engineers on making sure our levee system holds up. And over time, you've got to morph, you got to change, you got to fix, you got to repair. We've been making those repairs as we go. And it's been a wonderful ride and a great partnership with the two of us, making sure that this levee system holds for the Mississippi Delta.
Well, explain to them about sandballs, and during times of flood events, a lot of people hear about sandballs and want to know what one is. Something this small can grow this big and then be a major problem to the levee.
Absolutely. So our levee's tall. It's a great. We built our levee tall enough to withstand a project design flood. That's great. Problem is, the levee's built on something, and typically there's a sand layer or lens under the underground geology underneath the surface that you can't see, where all that pressure, that water from the Mississippi River pushes down and finds that weak link underneath our levee system and actually pushes the water to the protected side of the levee. And when it seeps up on the land side, they call that seep water. Well, if that seep water starts moving fast enough, it starts carrying material, okay? And when material starts popping up on the protected side of the levee, that's called a sand boil. The problem with the sand boil, there's not really much problem with underseepage. You're going to have underseepage. You're going to have that leak, okay? But the problem with the sand boil is it's carrying material with it, which is creating some kind of void, some kind of cavity, some kind of piping network underneath your levee system. Levee systems typically don't. They will fail from overtop, but we don't going to overtop our levee system because we're so tall. We would fail from underseepage because once you let that sand boil get out of control and carry this material, basically your foundation for your levee is basically gone, and eventually it just blows the levee out. That's basically what happened in 1927. The water was at the tip top of our levee in 1927. But basically, it wasn't because it was overtop and the guys were working at it nonstop, day and night, trying to fix that problem. It was the underseepage that failed the levee. So we have inspectors that go out during a flood event and they look for sand boils. And when they find a sand boil, they let us know, and the levee board crew goes out and actually puts some type of temporary measure in place to stop the sand from moving. So basically, you would build a ring of sandbags around a sand boil in the old days. That's what you used to do. And basically what that did is put a head of water on top of the sand boil the material would stop flowing, but the water would keep flowing, and that was just pure seep water, and that's fine.
And
We just don't want the
it's
movement
not as
material.
tall as the levee. You may have
Absolutely not.
only about 3 or 4 feet tall will contain that, slow the seepage down,
Absolutely.
and stop the carrying of soil and all like that.
Absolutely. So you're just trying to get a head of water on there. You're trying to stop the movement of material. You're not trying to stop the flow of water. So anyway, it's a game that you've got to look at every day. Every day something else pops up. Every day you've got to make adjustments to the system during a high water event, so you make sure you successfully pass it. So there's a very good reason you have a levee board. you don't just build that levee and walk away from it. You maintain it every day. We got a maintenance crew that goes out every day, does something to that levee system, so that when we do have a high water event, that levee system is maintained and can operate and work.
And during that high water event, it's not just the levee board and our maintenance crew working with the Corps of Engineers. We've got water districts that kick in, help us patrol, help us look for these areas, and the certain stages of the flood event, the more people we have on the levee, the more hours during the day until we get to a 24-hour day constant surveillance of it. And it's not just riding down the top of the levee looking with a flashlight. It's getting down in the woods, getting down in the very base of the levee, and seeing what we have.
And we saw a lot of volunteers, people not really associated with levee board, but during a flood event, it's all arms on deck, and our local citizens were calling in and saying, "Hey, I see something weird happening right here. We go check it out." We had farmers in the South Delta who knew where we had some problem areas, and every day they'd go out and double check what we were looking at, and they would find stuff. We got to the point where we had trained them, where if they found something, they knew what to do, what kind of temporary measures to play. Don't wait on us. Go ahead and fix it while you're there. So wonderful, work down there with people that just coming out of the woodwork to actually help during a flood event. One day,
Tell about Leota, what happened down?
That Sunday afternoon, we were working on a sand boil in this ag field right at the toe of the levee, and it was starting to get hot, and my crew was there, and they were working like mad, and they'd been working on it for an hour or two, and they were getting tired and hot, and Hank ended up driving up on them, and Patrick Bowles was our superintendent of maintenance at the time, and Hank said, "Hey Patrick, you need something? You need anything?" And Patrick says, "Well, I don't know." And Hank said, "Well, you need a few more people to help." And Patrick said, "Yeah, I could use a couple guys."
Throw sandbags.
Absolutely, it's a very labor-intensive job, and so he said, "Yeah, I could use a few people." Well, Hank got on the phone and called a few people, and before you know it, we had at least 100 people down at Lake Washington, at the Leota area, that were all making sandbags, helping place sandbags, just really enjoying being a part of the flood event, realizing they had a part of that flood event helping successfully pass
Their
it.
houses and their farms were right there within 5 miles of that levee, and they realized and understood this is a situation that needs to be, and they came from everywhere.
Yeah, so it was a wonderful community event. It's wonderful that you had people and volunteers that just jumped out there and got it there and picked up 50-pound sandbags and toted them around and made them just labor-intensive stuff that, a few people's going to wear them out. When you get 100 people, it's pretty easy work.
Explain to them what I call the striped-legged cavalry, which possibly may not be the proper terminology to use, but we need help in a lot of instances like this. And when you don't have the local community that you can call on, we lean on the sheriff's department, correctional facility.
Right. Our first problem in 2011 was up in northern Bolivar County. And we ended up having the sand boil pop up 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as always, an hour away. So that was the one day out of about a month I sent my crew home at 5 o'clock. I sent them home and said, "You guys take it easy, go spend some time with your families." They'd been working till dawn to dusk every day. I said, "Go home, get cleaned up, just enjoy some time with family." Well, of course, 5 o'clock, sand boil pops up. First one we really seen in 2011 flood, and it was way on the north end. So we went and looked at it. We cut it up, called all the crew, said, "Come on in. We got to work on it." They all left the house, came in, drove up there an hour. We sandbagged around this sand boil. It was a pretty serious one. And before you know it, what we had done, we worked for until 10 o'clock at night. What we had done, the sand boil got bigger and just kind of blew the sandbags out and just kind of ruined what we were doing. And we were gassed and exhausted, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?" And we called the Bolivar County Sheriff, Matt Grimmick at the time, and we said, "Hey, y'all got some prisoners that maybe could help us out a little bit? And they said, absolutely. And they said, it's going to take a little time to gather them together, but we'll get there. We'll be there about 2 o'clock in the morning. We said, great. These guys showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning, vans, light units, deputies, just amazing crowd of people that came, lit up the whole area in the middle of the night. Those prisoners, 30 of them, just made sandbags like mad, all formed chain gangs. We were in the middle of it. They passed a sandbag, we passed the next guy, we placed it. We worked all the way through till 6 o'clock the next morning. And if it wasn't for them, we would have had a problem right there in North Bolivar County for sure. So we called on the prisoners a lot. And the thing about the prisoners was every time they came to work for something like that, for the good of the community, they actually got time off their sentence. So they didn't get paid, but they got a reduced sentence by doing the work that they did. And in Bolivar County, they had what they called the A-Team. This was a work group of prisoners. And these guys were very talented on building stuff, constructing stuff for Bolivar County, building buildings, very talented. And these guys were stout and strong, and they really felt a part of the whole process as well. So it was wonderful.
Originally, when they got there, it was just manpower. And then I said, well, let's wait just a second. And Peter and we explained to them what we were doing, how it was going to work, and what will happen once we get this done. It was like after halftime at the football game.
Right,
they came back in and they were working. They realized what they were doing. They understood the gravity of the situation. And they realized what needed to be done. And they kicked in and did it. And I can't tell you how honored I am to have been able to work with a group of folks like that.
Right.
That knew what was going on and realized, we got to get this done. We got to get this done.
Right.
So, and they did.
Gang of 30 people in a row, and I'm sitting in the middle of it, and they passed that 50-pound bag. Sometimes they were 75, 50, 80-pound bags, and the guy next to me would hold it up there, and I'd grab it, and it'd drop like this, and I'd bring it to the next guy. But this stout dude next to me, that was one of the prisoners, he would always get that bag, and he'd just reach over there and just hold it for me. Just like that. He would not dip. He would just grab it and go like this. And I'd be something would slow down. I'd be looking up there, and I'd look over there and I'd say, the guy was just holding the bag for me. I'm like, oh my God, just all night long, And I'm just gassed and worn out. But they were incredible. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience. It was a tough experience, but it's something we really needed to go through and figure out, how our levee system performed and making sure we passed that event.
When I got called in on it that morning, I live in the south end of the county, and this is on the total north end of Bolivar County. And Peter or Bobby or somebody said, can you come by and pick up some sandbags at the levee board? We need them at St. Francis, at Francisville. So I said, sure. So I whipped through here, and I'm coming through Bolivar County, and yeah, I see him right down the road there, that highway patrolman. He flicks his blue light on me, and I pull over, and he said, sir, do you realize how fast you're going? I pulled out my levee board. I said, sir, I've got 800 sandbags in the back of this truck. They need me in the north end of Bolivar County. He tipped his hat and he said, be careful. And from that point on, he'd hit that blue light one time and tip his hat as he passed me on that highway. But it's an honor to be able to work on a situation like that when there's grave danger involved in it. But to be able to work with folks like the prison workforce and with the powers to be and the Corps of Engineers. And I realized that right here at Lake Ferguson, right there, Upper Lake Ferguson Road, we had an area up there. And here we had the top hydrologist, if they're the top in the United States Corps of Engineers, that means they're the top. He got more sense than anybody in the world in a situation like that. And when you see them in their hands and knees, sticking their arm all the way down into as far as they can in a sandball, feeling the walls of it, and it took me aback. I just said, wow, look at what I'm honored to be a part of. And hopefully that it's going to be a successful fight, which it is a fight. Right. And it was. All right. But look at the folks we were working with. Yeah,
we were, the Corps of Engineers being a partner with us, they not only provided us inspectors, but they also provided us the geotechnical hydraulic guys that would come out and would say, hey man, come look at this. We're not exactly sure what to do here. They came out and looked at things and gave us advice and to walk us through a bunch of stuff that we could do to fix ourselves. But there were also things that we couldn't do, like buck shoot. Some of these at Albemarle, we had the levee slide on the land side. Things the levee board didn't have the manpower, didn't have the resources to get done. We had a couple of problem areas during that 2011 flood that the Corps came in, actually they took it over, and they got their higher level crews together, and they did the fix, moved 20,000 yards of sand and moved dirt all over the place to build ring levees and fill in things. They were amazing. So we had never done that before. We had never really had to call on those guys before, but it was such an event that it kind of overwhelmed our resources and our manpower on some of the events that they stepped in and fixed it for. So, our hats off to the United States Army Corps of Engineers for the work that those guys do. Because we work with them daily, but during a flood event, you really are close and figure out what you need, and they help out on everything. But let's switch over to some of our interior stuff we're working on. We have about 350 miles of interior streams that we're responsible for minor maintenance on. So every year, we contract with a helicopter applicator, and the last few years it's been Provine Helicopters out of Greenwood, Mississippi. Does a fabulous job for us. And basically, they fly our interior streams, and they spray the privet and underbrush growing up in the channel with an aquatic herbicide. It doesn't hurt the fish or the wildlife or the environment, anything like that, but it just kills the privet and underbrush growing up in the channel so that channel stays open for flood control purposes, so that you can pass big rainfall events in the delta. You can pass them quickly out through the delta. So it works out really good. So we typically do that in the fall time, and that's kind of our responsibilities on our interior streams. But that kind of brings up the Yazoo backwater, okay? So all of our water in the delta flows north to south. And so, everything, if it rains in Greenville, Mississippi, that water flows down and goes on down through Steel Bayou and ends up working its way all the way down, and eventually gets into the Yazoo River right at Vicksburg and empties into the Mississippi River. Well, we have a backwater system down there, because what happens when the Mississippi River comes up high, it used to just come around the mainline levee at the very bottom at Vicksburg and just start backing into the delta. Well, we said we got to fix that, so we ended up building backwater levees, and we built drainage structures. Okay, so when the water's low in the Mississippi River, we'll keep those drainage structures open. The water just passes through the delta, goes through the Big Sunflower River, Steel Bayou, Main Canal. It all flows way down and has to pass through Steel Bayou structure to get in the Yazoo River, to get in the Mississippi River.
Not only Greenville water, this is water from the whole top delta too, Clarksdale water.
This is water from Clarksdale, Mississippi. This is water from 4,093 square miles. That is 2.62 million acres of the Mississippi Delta. When it rains on it, the water has to pass through Steel Bayou structure to get through there. So when the Mississippi River gets high, we close off Steel Bayou structure. We close it off to keep the Mississippi River from backing into the delta, and it works great. That keeps the river from backing into the delta. Wonderful stuff. But when it keeps raining in the Mississippi Delta, Clarksdale, Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, towards Greenwood, Mississippi, all the water just goes down South Delta to a closed structure, and it just starts piling up. We call that backwater. That backwater, there's no way to get rid of the backwater until you can open up those gates and let the water back out again, until the Mississippi River goes down.
What happened in 2011? The greatest flood of our recorded history. What happened in the Delta?
2011 could have been a really, really hideous event, worse than it was, because we had a maximum Mississippi River flood, breaking stage records everywhere. The water got
4 inches from coming over the top of that backwater.
Got within 4 inches of overtopping our backwater levee, and at the same time, we had very little rainfall in the delta, amazingly nothing. And so the backwater at that time only got to 90 feet, and the top of my levee is 107, so it was like 17 feet ahead. That was from one side of the levee to the other side. And extremely, about putting it to the maximum test of a levee system. Can that levee hold back that water to this close to the tip top of the levee? And it did. We had absolutely no problems with that backwater levee whatsoever. We were scared it was going to overtop. At overtop, we were very nervous. The Corps came in and put some poly sheeting on the land side slope of that levee, so if it did overtop, it wouldn't erode the material away and blow the levee out. But it did not overtop, and we had no underseepage issues at all. So it was a tremendous event with a very little backwater flow, which made for a huge head differential in the two. As opposed to the last couple of years where we've had significant backwater floods. 2018, we got to 95.2 feet. It flooded 444,000 acres in March of 2018. Then we had the worst ever, which was the one in 2019, in May of 2019, we got to 98.2 feet, and that flooded 548,000 acres. And when it did that, it flooded 231,000 acres of cropland that never got planted in 2019 at all. It flooded 686 homes. It flooded 3 highways. So not only was your home getting flooded, but you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't get to work. You couldn't do this. It just was a nightmare. And then again, we had this year's flood, 2020. We got to 97.2 feet. And so, 96.9 feet. And that flooded 500,000 acres again. For 3 years in a row, had some significant backwater floods. The only good thing about the 2019 backwater flood was that people finally woke up and they realized, oh my gosh, this backwater flood is going to, could flood my house or has flooded my house. Oh my God, look at the environment and the destruction of the environment. Oh my God, look at the wildlife that are drowning in the water. Look at the wildlife that has died. Look at the wildlife that's never coming back. I mean, look at the trees that have been underwater for 6 months at a time. And oh my gosh, what does that mean 2 years down the road? These trees going to die? What's going to happen here? A lot of unknowns. It woke a lot of people up. And so the Yazoo Backwater Project is a project where we would actually build a pump to pump the water out of the backwater over the levee into the Mississippi River at Vicksburg, and to evacuate the water into the South Delta to slow down the problem we're having with backwater floods.
How many other backwater areas and pumps are there?
Everywhere along the lower Mississippi River, there are backwater areas. Okay, there are 4 major ones, right? All the other 3 have a huge pump that pumps the water out. The drainage structures, levees, and pumps that pump the water out. Mississippi has the backwater levees and drainage structures, but we don't have the pump. And that's what we're working on now. There's actually 22 federally funded pumping plants within a 200-mile radius of our pump site that are working today. We're the only ones that don't have a pump. So anyway, 2000. You get a question? Go ahead.
Why do we not have the pump? Excuse me.
Right. This project, the Yazoo Backwater Project, was authorized in 1941. We saw this problem, that long ago, 80 years ago. And due to improvements on the river with cutoffs and channel improvements and such, we didn't see a high water in the Mississippi River from 1950 until the 1973 flood. And people were a little complacent. 23 years without high water, they just said, yeah, we really need this. We don't need this. What are we going to do? Well, we think we need it. Let's go ahead and start working on it. They started building those backwater levees in the late 60s. And then you had the 73 flood come along. Like, oh my God, we need these backwater levees complete. And so all of a sudden everybody jumped on it. And we completed the levees. We completed the drainage structures by 1978. So now the only thing left to do is build that pump, right? Which everyone else already has. And so we started working on that. Started working on the environmental impact statement for that study. And in 1986, they actually literally started building the pumps. They started doing the earthwork for the project itself. And then somebody made a political move, and in the Word of Bill of 1986 actually put cost sharing on future projects, and they backdated it to catch one project in the United States of America, the Yazoo Backwater Project. So in 1986, we were building the project, and it got stopped because Levee Board could not afford, a cost share of a couple $100 million project. No way we could afford that. So it just basically died. It died for 10 years because it took until 1996 Word of Bill to actually redefine start of construction to take this project back out of a cost share. So now it's back into 100% federal cost share, and that was 1996. Well, that was a long time ago, 24 years ago. Well, at that point, the environmental community had gotten very strong, and they were going to really oppose any big pumping plants like this in the future. So we knew that. So we said, okay, we've got to go through a consensus process and figure out a project that's good for the environment, good for the people, good for the farmers, good for homes and the animals. And that's what we did for a couple of years, is went through a consensus process. And we came out with a project in 2000. The draft report came out about a project with a pump with also a large-scale reforestation feature of that project. That's the project that took 7 more years to get to the final report in 2007. So in 2007, the Corps released the final report for the Backwater Project. Great project, huge environmental gains in every category, also flood control, which we're looking at. Great project. But then the EPA decided we're going to veto this project using our 404C veto authority in the Clean Water Act. And they vetoed the project in 2008. Didn't make sense. You had the Environmental Protection Agency killing a project that was only going to help the environment. And so it was very, very difficult, very hard to understand. Nothing we could do. It was just a move. 2008 till 2020, we've had almost a backwater flood every year. Had we had those pumps in place, we would have prevented probably $1 billion worth of damages had we had those pumps in place. So the pumps are economically justifiable. If they cost a couple $100 million, you've already proven you'd have saved yourself $1 billion in just 12 years alone. So here we go, 2019 backwater flood. EPA comes over and actually tours the backwater area during the backwater flood. And the EPA administrator from Atlanta, Georgia, looked out of that helicopter and looked down and saw all that water. And once she understood that wasn't a lake we were looking at, that was farmland underwater. And she saw the homes underwater, and she saw the wildlife population stranded on the levee, and she saw the roads underwater. She said, this can't be happening. I can't believe the EPA would have vetoed this project because of the environmental damage.
Circled over the levee, over the Mississippi River,
Yeah.
and looked at the Louisiana land and looked
Right.
at Mississippi land. What happened?
It was very interesting. We would take off into Louisiana, fly over the Mississippi River into the Mississippi backwater area, and look at all the water. The obvious thing was, when you were in Louisiana, the ground was dry. There was no flooding at all in Louisiana. That's because they got pumps. The pumps were working. The pumps were turned on. The farmland was getting ready to be planted in corn. We had a very big, successful corn crop in Louisiana.
And the Louisiana land was actually lower.
6 feet lower. The Louisiana land is actually physically 6 feet lower than the Mississippi land. And then you fly over to the Mississippi River and the Mississippi side, and everything's underwater, 3 feet underwater, and we're 6 feet higher. And it's because Louisiana has their pumps, Mississippi does not. So it was a real eye-opener of what you have pumps and what you don't have pumps. So anyway, this 2019 event really got the Corps and EPA working back together again. And they actually worked together, and they came up with a new plan. And the new plan still involves a 14,000 cubic feet per second pump. But they're moving it from Steel Bayou to Deer Creek. It's about 10 miles east. And what that's doing is by moving the pumping plant to that location, it's going to be just east of Highway 61, just north of the Yazoo River. It's going to intercept all the water from the Sunflower River system, which is about 82% of the drainage basin in the Delta. It's going to capture that water first and pump it over the levee, as opposed to inundating the Steel Bayou Basin, which is only 18% of the Delta, and then having to pump it over down there. So it's going to be a little bit better by moving to that location than it was at the old Steel Bayou location. The other big deal about this is they're going to put in supplemental low-flow wells along the Mississippi River. And so where you're going to have this huge pump that's going to be pumping water over in springtime for flood control, for flood purposes, you're going to have these wells in the North Delta, which are going to turn in the fall time when our streams all go dry, and our fish die, and our environment dies, and the mussels die, and the aquatics die because there's no water. They're going to turn those pumps on, those low-flow wells in, basically taking water from underneath the Mississippi River levee, from the Mississippi River, pumping it into the Delta streams to add water to our Delta streams, which is going to help sustain the aquatics and the fisheries and the environment. So you got this wonderful 12-month project now, okay? You got a project that's going to remove water when it needs to be removed in flood season, and it's going to be adding water in the fall time when you need the water. So you've got huge environmental gains with this new proposed project, and we're really proud of it. We're proud of the new pumping plant. It was a diesel pumping plant back in 2007. That's what they're going to run on. Now it's going to be natural gas. It's going to have a lot less carbon footprint. I mean, everything we're doing is making the environment better. The flood control's still there, though. Your 100-year event in Issaquah, Sharp County, in the South Delta is 100.3 today. With the pumps put in place, it's going to drop 5.1 feet down to 95.2 feet. That's going to remove basically almost every home down there. It's going to protect all your roads. It's going to protect all your infrastructure. It's going to provide habitat, hundreds of thousands of acres for the deer and the wildlife to survive on during future backwater floods. So sustain your environment, sustain your wildlife, sustain your fish. It's a win-win all the way around. Win for the people, homes aren't flooded. The farmers' land won't get flooded, or if it is flooded, the duration will be a lot shorter. It's going to be a win-win all the way around. So we're really proud of it. Corps of Engineers released that draft report on October 16th. We're right in the middle of a public comment period. That's going to end November 30th this year. We need for everybody who lives in the Mississippi Delta who understands this project to send a message to the Corps of Engineers, hey, great job, great plan. We need these pumps. Please proceed with building these pumps and finish the pumps.
One of the most interesting things I did this past year was the American Rivers Environmental Organization put the Sunflower River back on the top 10 most endangered rivers in America in the event these pumps were built. I think they're number 2, the Sunflower River is. And I understand and realize the hydraulics of the whole thing. And at 87, when the pumps would kick on to try to maintain that elevation, there's still 300 and something thousand.
215,000 acres are underwater.
Are still underwater, and the
feet.
majority of those acres are the environmentally sensitive areas, are the Delta National Forest, the wooded areas, these areas that harbor all the deer, the turkey, the raccoon, all of this kind of stuff. So the problem that I saw was that when American Rivers said it's going to drain the Sunflower River, I put, after inviting any organization that I could think of to come down and tour that area, the backwater area with me, I went ahead and put my boat in the water when the elevation was at 87.
Right.
I first rode it as much as I could in my truck, and then I put my boat in the water, and I went up Steel Bow as far as I could go. I went up Deer Creek as far as I could go. I went up the Sunflower River system as far as I could go. And the entire area was still underwater. It's still outside of its banks. So I don't understand how an organization can say those pumps are going to drain the system, dry the whole, make the river dry up when it's still under flood condition.
Right. You can't see the
It
banks of the river.
made no
it's all
sense
water.
to me, and I'm in my boat at 87 looking at it, taking pictures, and can verify all of that. So, in my viewpoint, it is a win-win situation all the way around. I really don't want to go back down there anymore and see the dead deer and the bear floating in the ditches and the such as this, and there was, I don't even want to, I took a picture of it and I sent it to Peter, and I think I took it off my camera. I called it the Tree of Death. We're not used to seeing many turkey vultures in the Mississippi Delta, but there was one tree that had over 200 turkey vultures in it. And all they were doing was resting their belly, taking a nap, because you never saw the decimation of wildlife that I saw. And it was just a smorgasbord for these turkey vultures and buzzards. It was a sad situation to me. I don't want to see that again. And I see no problem with the pumps. It's a win-win situation. And I know what the field wells, the well fields along the Mississippi River levee, pumping water underneath there in the Mississippi alluvial aquifer right there to replenish Sunflower River, Bogue Fly, Deer Creek, and things like this possibly. Right now today, you can go up to Clarksdale and jump across the Sunflower River. It shouldn't be that way. It should have water in it to sustain the aquatics in it, the fisheries, the mussels, the clams, whatever is up in there, to keep it working as a wetland. So, one other thing on the wetland issue. I've got a wetland on my farm. I understand how it works, how it fills itself up with water in the springtime, and through evaporation and drainage, it works its way down with the birds, the frogs, the alligators, everything that works within that ecosystem as it's serving itself as a wetland, as it's supposed to work. But when I go into the South Delta and I see a wetland there that during a normal dry year is doing the same thing that the wetland on my farm is doing, and then when I ride over that wetland, and for 6 months it has 8 to 9 feet of water over it, it's not a wetland anymore. It's a lake, and it loses its function as a wetland. So the project that I see it is a good project all the way around, and hopefully will go to fruition and be completed.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there, as you know, and it's not really people from here. Obviously, it's people from California and New York, and it's these national environmental groups that love to throw misinformation out there to make it look bad. And it's an easy target because It's a couple $100 million project. It's very expensive. It's on federal taxpayers' money. We understand that. They can say, "Oh, that project in Mississippi, it's going to destroy 200,000 acres of wetlands, and it's going to cost a couple $100 million. Oh, please vote no. We don't want that project down here." You know, it's easy to pick on, but that's a fundraiser for them. That's how they make their money. Hey, send us money to help fight this stupid project in Mississippi. When we're here and we know what the real deal is, we know 87 feet, there's 200-something thousand acres underwater. That doesn't dry anything up, right? It's wet. You know, we know those pumps aren't big enough. It's still going to be flooding down there, okay? We know all the environmental benefits that are going to happen. We know that pumping water in during the low flow season through our delta streams is great for the environment. They don't want to hear about that. They're never going to be for the project, because if they're for the project, how do they raise money? So we understand the game that's being played. So when you read terrible articles in the paper with the bad misinformation, realize that's bad misinformation from people who aren't here and don't understand the project. And you know, we're very proud of it, and we're here. If anybody ever has a question, we're here to answer questions and explain the truth on it, because it is a great project and it's going to be good. One that's not only good for flood control, but it's also great for the environment. So we need it to help make the environment better.
Talk a little bit about a lot of people saying, well, 14,000 cubic foot per second pump. That's a lot of water. It is a lot of water. And they said, well, it's going to be flooding out downstream. Explain what happens.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point out. Is we're worried about what? Okay, so you pump the water over the levee. Oh, aren't you just creating all this wall of water 10 feet deep, and it's going to drown New Orleans and drown Vicksburg and drown everybody downstream of it? You got to put in context what that Mississippi River is carrying at that time. That's 14,000 cubic feet per second to a Mississippi River at Vicksburg. That's 2 million cubic feet per second. So you're talking less than 1% of the water. When the Corps ran the models on this, it's only about a tenth of an inch. It's like an inch. I'm sorry, a tenth of a foot. It's like an inch of water maybe at Vicksburg, Mississippi. More water than you would have had you not had the pumps. And as we know, when the river finally drops out and the gates open up and the gates pass 50,000 cubic feet per second, you're adding a lot more water to it, and nobody's complaining about that. Nobody's also complaining about all the other 22 federally funded pumping plants that are pumping the same right now into the Mississippi River, way more water than we're talking about, and they're not complaining about that. So that's just another misinformation out there to design to make people downstream scared of it, to make them against it, and that's the goal of that.
One thing that I didn't realize until this year, we're at a lower cycle in the Mississippi River than we have been in 2-3 years.
Right.
And our gates were closed at a point. Explain
Absolutely.
that. What that?
Yeah. So in August of 2018, we had a couple of hurricanes and tropical storms that just went right up the Mississippi River, kind of like what we're seeing today. But they were right on top of the Mississippi River, right across the Ohio Valley. And from August of 2018, we jumped from what we call average to way above average, and we remained above it for 2 years. Okay, we finally dropped back down to what we call average about August this year, 2 years later. And it's now dropped below average. As you know, they've had some issues on the Mississippi River on navigation because the river's kind of low. Well, in the South Delta, if the steel biostructure wasn't there, all the water in the Delta would just eventually just drain completely out. Okay, they basically have to close the gates to keep water in the Delta, otherwise it would drain out. I think on the Vicksburg district, on the riverside, that steel biostructure got down in the 50 feet range, high 50s, and everything goes dry, you know, at 60 something feet, it goes dry. Well, you can let all the water in the Delta and be completely drawn dry. They shut it just to keep 70 feet in the Delta, just so we had water in the Delta.
So water in these streams for the fish and for the aquatics and for all the mussels.
So once you add those supplemental low flow wells to that system, you're adding water everywhere, which sustains everything. So, like I said, it's a wonderful project. Another thing about those wells is all of our communities in the Delta, even if you're way up north and you don't even know, you never worried about a backwater flood in your life. Rain falls, hit the ground, and goes away. You never see it again. You're not worried about it. One thing you worry about from a municipal standpoint is you've got wastewater treatment plants, and you treat the wastewater and then you discharge to the Big Sunflower River or to wherever you discharge your water to for your NPDES permit with MDEQ. If there's not enough water in that stream, you can't discharge your wastewater to it. These wells actually add water to it, and that all these guys will be compliant. So it helps the entire delta, even if you don't even think about what you're doing or where your water goes. You still need that flow. You need that flow in that stream, not only for the environment, but you also need it for your own selves and your wastewater treatment plant discharges.